everyone. My name is Ed Mitchell, and in celebration of my 30th birthday, I present part 1 of my top 30 favorite games of all time. Since the first 20 games in my top 30 are in alphabetical order, there's nothing more perfect than to start out with the Xbox Live Summer of Arcade indie darling from 2011, Bastion. In the heady days before Hades, Supergiant Games' first game that they released was Bastion. It introduced all these concepts that people know and love from Hades nowadays. The combat was fast-paced, it felt really good, it was very forceful. And because it wasn't a roguelike, you didn't feel as punished whenever you messed something up. It felt more light, more airy, and nothing could possibly show this more than the combination of the fantastic narration. Now, there are a lot of games out there that try to do like the constant background narration idea, but Bastion, as far as I know, kind of was the first to, if not do it, then get it right. And that combined with the music of this game gave it this sense of like wonder and awe as you explore these relatively unpopulated areas. But when you found people in the world, it really meant something. It meant that these characters were someone important that you could interact with and talk to and experience their stories. Really, the whole idea of this game was that like there was some post-apocalyptic event and you wanted to move on from this area into a better life. And so your job was to power up the Bastion to get to a place where it could take you to the next world or whatever. But the act of going around and gathering things and powering up your weapons and just made this like cycle of really powerful gameplay that I can't quite describe more than just I liked it. It was one of the first like kind of beat 'em up games that I really, really liked. And I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that the proving grounds in this game, they're very hard. There's not a lot of forgiveness in getting the #1 gold star, and so you really have to master each of the weapons in order to succeed. Bastion did all these things that at the time there wasn't a lot of indie games out there, so it was kind of like first of the scene with these great concepts which could show that a small team could actually accomplish a lot and do a lot of great things. And I want to close and kind of talk about the soundtrack, because I think people know Supergiant Games now because of not just their games and the gameplay and stuff like that, but also the music that backs it. And Bastion was the first one, so it was the gold standard for this company. And this is one of the first video games where I separately bought the soundtrack, downloaded it on my phone, and would listen to it when I was walking around campus or driving. And so I would say that just go listen to the music, and that should sell you enough on the game alone. But there's so much more around this game that makes it truly one of the greatest indie games, or, and for me, one of the best games I've ever played. Next up on the list in ABC order is Civilization 3 from Firaxis Games. Civilization 3 was kind of a surprise hit for me, and what I mean by that is I didn't know where I got this game from. I don't know who gave it to me. I don't remember buying it. I was only 10 at the time or something like that. But all of a sudden I opened our little CD storage case that we had for our computer games, and I saw this Civilization game there, and I was like, what is this game? I've never heard of it before. And so I put it in the CD drive and I installed it, and it was immediate, just captivating. I mean, you start out, you just get a settler at first, and you put down roots and make your town. And of course I was Rome because I was in Latin at the time, and so that was really interesting to me. So I set down my city and I started building, and I pick warriors and archers and spearmen and all this stuff that I'm like really into, and we go explore around our little continent that we have, and then I run into the first other civilization. It happened to be Egyptians. And the Egyptians, this very, I would explore kind of in their area, and they used to get pissed at me for doing that until eventually I just had enough of it. I bolstered my armory, and then I attacked them. This is like my first strategy game. It was the first one where I really felt it was simple enough for my 10-year-old self to understand, but deep enough that I kept like discovering new things that you could do with the game. And I remember the first time you get nukes and the first time you get the space race and stuff like that. And just, it's so great. And this version of the game in particular was still simple enough where I kind of felt like the later versions of the game were like way too complex and just threw everything at you all at once. And that got really frustrating and kind of turned me off to the later games. As much as I would love to say that I'm a huge Civ 5 fan or a huge Civ 6 fan, it just wasn't the same as the Civ 3. And so I really think back mostly on those great moments where like I attacked the Egyptians early, or the Greeks like totally wrecked me with their boats, and just like, I mean, this was the original game that was just one more turn, just one more turn, just one more turn, and then you go to bed at 6 a.m. because you stayed up all night playing just one more turns. Even when I was capturing this footage, I definitely kind of experienced the same thing again, where I finished capturing the footage and I just kept playing a little bit until I realized it was time to start work, and that just brought back so many great memories of me playing this game when I was little. So the Civilization 3 is a fantastic little strategy game. If you prefer the later ones, there's no problem with that, but the whole series itself is great. So Civilization 3 is definitely one of my favorite games of all time. Next up on my list is Darksiders. Darksiders is one of those games that at first glance, especially in the footage that I had to capture, it seems like a very generic action game, but actually it's a really well done Zelda knockoff. And slight spoilers, this is not going to be the only Zelda game you see on my list. The gameplay here is so great, and it's kind of gritty and dark in the way that Twilight Princess kind of never was able to accomplish, in my opinion. The story was intriguing from the start. This angels versus demons narrative was something that, as someone who grew up in a church but wasn't like in the Catholic Church or whatever, the concepts were a little bit foreign to me, and I never played Diablo, so it was kind of new to me, right? And it really is highlighted by the excellent voice acting, especially by Liam O'Brien, who plays War. He's also the voice actor of Illidan Stormrage, so that was a nice little jump for me because I really enjoyed his character as Illidan in World of Warcraft. But I think it's really hard to talk about this game without talking about Zelda in comparison. It does all the Zelda formula stuff. You go to dungeons, you unlock items, you use that item to solve the rest of the dungeon, to beat the boss, and then you can solve puzzles in the world using that item. It was just so great. It had been a while since we had gotten a Zelda game. I think Skyward Sword hadn't come out yet, but it was a nice like refresher. It's like reminded me why I love the Zelda formula so much. And so that, combined with the fact that it was a voice-acted game, which Zelda hadn't been prior to this, really brought this nice package into a fun game. And the later games in the series are also super fun. But Darksiders, the first one, just has a real good place in my heart. It's kind of like a B-tier game in terms of AA kind of, but it still managed to be one of the greatest games I've ever played because it so successfully knocked off that Zelda formula. Up next is Final Fantasy IV. Now, this might come as a surprise to many people watching, but this is going to be the only Final Fantasy game on the list. I never had a PlayStation growing up, so I never got to experience the series until it got ported to the Game Boy Advance. During that time, though, I played Final Fantasy 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6, and then eventually when 3 was ported to the DS, I played that as well. Now, this game kind of broke what is the traditional Final Fantasy formula. The characters had static classes, and this is a departure from the job systems of even Final Fantasy 3 or later entries, but it meant that the writing could really focus on the class as an identity of the character. You can't think of Rydia without thinking of the fact that she's a summoner. And Cecil's character arc and transformation from Dark Knight is one of the most memorable moments in video games for me. He goes from someone who just blindly follows orders to someone who questions whether he's doing the right thing. It really shows an element of his character, and you wouldn't see that if the job system was there where you could switch on the fly to any other job you wanted to. I love this game because you not only get like thrown into the action immediately to the point that you commit what is arguably an act of terrorism right at the start. And I think what was most unique for this game for me at the time was that it's the first time playing a game where you kind of start out as the bad guy. And your entire journey throughout the game is about you coming to terms with the fact that you did some bad things and you should own up to those things. The world here is much bigger than it seems at first glance. You get a boat, you get not one but two airships, you get to go underground into this like lava area where the dwarves lived, you get to go up to the moon. I mean, there's just a lot this game does to kind of show how big scale the war is, and something that you don't really see in modern games because they had to work with such small pixel art rather than being able to create these giant 3D rendered environments. Final Fantasy IV, only Final Fantasy game on my list, but it absolutely deserves a spot here. Next up on my list is Fire Emblem Path of Radiance. I, like many others, was first introduced to the Fire Emblem franchise when Super Smash Bros. Melee came out and you got to play as Marth or Roy. However, I didn't really get into the actual series until my neighbor lent me the GBA games, Fire Emblem Sacred Stones, and I think he also lent me the original Fire Emblem as well. Now, I really love those games. I think they're really great introductions into the series, and Sacred Stones had a world map that you could walk around in and go to like optional areas and stuff like that. But Path of Radiance was the first introduction into 3D for the series. Not only that, but it introduced a lot of concepts that were staples later on in the series, like optional base conversations, bonus EXP, things like that. But one of the things I really like about it is the introduction of these non-human races called the Laguz. With the Laguz, you get the ability to transform from a more human-looking character into an animal, like a cat, a bird, or even a dragon. And while I did think it was annoying having to protect them while they weren't transformed, it added a level of dynamic that isn't present in any other Fire Emblem game. This game was tough. It was tougher than Sacred Stones for sure, because it went back to that classic formula of just going from chapter to chapter rather than being in this open map that you could do optional stuff in. But it wasn't too tough. Radiant Dawn, the sequel to this, was much more difficult in comparison. I think the new human classes were pretty cool. It was the first time being able to play as a soldier, and the addition of a mounted axe knight was a cool contrast to the sword and lance wielding cavalier of the previous games. And I think at its core, the game's story was about racism and how we're actually more alike than we are different. The humans called the Laguz subhumans, and it wasn't till a little bit later that you realize that when a Laguz calls a human instead of Bjork, then that's actually insulting to them. It's thinking less of them. And it just like kind of had this cool vibe of, while race is something that is so obvious that divides us by the way we look, in fact, we all have like family. We all care about each other. And the core bit of this game is about bringing these very disparate groups of people together in these very different countries together. And it turns out we all just want to live peacefully. So Fire Emblem Path of Radiance is a great Fire Emblem game. It sucks that it's like relegated to the GameCube, but if you have a chance to play it, I would absolutely recommend it. Alright, now we're to the first Legend of Zelda on my list. Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. It is insane to me how crazy good this game is. While it's not the traditional Zelda kind of formula or whatever, it's still one of the biggest open worlds that I've ever been in. And I love how good the physics are in this game. The couple of abilities that you get are so great for the sandbox that you're in. The ability to put ice on water allows you to quickly traverse across water, whereas before you potentially had to swim, right? The magnet ability allows you to pull up chests that are embedded in water or embedded in the ground. And it's just so cool that you can climb up almost any surface and then fly down on your glider. Now, I do want to talk real quick about why I don't have this in my top 10. I think that The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is an incredibly good game. However, it kind of doesn't follow the traditional Zelda formula that I find so addicting. It's a great open world, don't get me wrong, but because it's such a great open world, it kind of loses its luster when it comes to the dungeons in this game. And because of the structure of this game, you don't get to unlock any new items or things like that after you get off the Grand Plateau, and I just think that there's something kind of missing there for me. I also think that the combat is kind of not that good. Because of the weapon durability stuff, you always feel like you should never use your most powerful weapons. And later on, enemies kind of get kind of spongy, and that gets really irritating while you're going through 3 or 4 different weapons in order to kill them. And I just think that's very frustrating and takes away from the overall experience of the game for me. Now, remember, I do love this game. It's a great video game. It's just, I don't get the same kind of satisfaction that I get out of some of the other Zelda games that I've played, and especially the one that ended up on my top 10. The Legend of Zelda Oracle of Ages / Oracle of Seasons is one of my favorite games of all time, and the biggest reason for this is that it's my first Zelda game. I was introduced to it just by like walking around the Toys R Us, and I picked up this Game Boy Color game. I'd previously only played Pokemon on this thing, and I picked this up and I was like, this looks so cool. And I convinced my parents to buy it, and I played it and just fell in love with the game. You're thrown into the game, you immediately meet the titular Oracle of Ages or Seasons for the other game, and they get kidnapped, and so you're thrust into your duty as the hero to go save them. The dungeons are really smart here. They're very simple to begin with, but get pretty hard not that long into the game, and you get the ability to ride on these animals that you can either be in a kangaroo or on a flying elephant. And the items are like really cool too. I know the Roc's Feather is from the previous Link's Awakening game, but the Magnet Glove is something new that you didn't use in a previous game, and that was super cool and kind of introductory to the Breath of the Wild magnet ability. And I know the games don't look like much, but back in the day, these 2 games were very expansive, and that doesn't even get into the concept of using the secrets to transfer your Link from one world to another. It's super, super cool. I highly recommend anyone give it a try. It's right now only available on Game Boy Color, but there was a version of it released on the Virtual Console and the 3DS. Hopefully one day they'll get around to porting to Switch, or even more ideally, doing a remake of these 2 games in the same style Link's Awakening. That would be super, super cool. Please, Nintendo, please. Next up is Mark of the Ninja. Mark of the Ninja is a side-scrolling stealth action game from Klei Entertainment. Klei Entertainment is probably better known nowadays for the Don't Starve series, but this was a huge hit when it first came out, before Don't Starve. Mark of the Ninja is just another example of indie game studios bringing cool ideas to the table. This is actually one of the first stealth games I ever played, and after this I got really into them, really diving deep into games like Dishonored and Deus Ex. But like a lot of games on my list, Mark of the Ninja will hold a very special place in my heart because it introduced me to that genre of video games. I really like the way you move around the world, and the 2-step takedown mechanic is unique. It kind of keeps you in the action even though you're taking down these enemies. I really like all the different tools and gadgets you get to use as a way to distract guards or move around faster. And so it really is the complete package. It might not sound like I'm saying a lot about this game, but it really feels good to play, and I think it's really hard to describe that or show that in a video. So just know that it's a highly recommended game for me, and I think everyone should play it. Alright, coming up next on my list is Mercenaries: Playground of Destruction. This is one of the first open world sandbox shooter games I played. Previously to this, the only shooter I think I had ever played was Halo, and I think Halo 2 had come out at this point, but still, both of those games are very linear. You're kind of going down a defined path, and so the direction of which you need to go is very clear, unlike in this game. This game is non-linear, and the idea that you could destroy pretty much anything in the world was a really novel concept at the time. The game itself takes place in North Korea, and you're tasked with taking down the Deck of 52, which is a concept kind of stolen from the Iraq War, where there are 52 generals or scientists or leaders in the main general's army that you have to take down one by one in order to gather enough intel to take out the big guy. And because the game was so open, you could really choose the right way you wanted to take out enemies. You could choose to go in guns blazing, you could choose to hide in a vehicle and pretend that you're a North Korean person while you're in a North Korean vehicle, or you could try some other kind of form of stealth, or take them down from afar using airstrikes and stuff like that. It really was an open game. You had so many options to choose from, which I just thought was so cool and so novel at the time. I mean, Grand Theft Auto existed at this time or whatever, but you didn't get nearly as much destructive capability as you did in this game. Not to mention that you got these cheat codes that allowed you to unlock like more powerful weapons and stuff, and even like a handheld nuke, which allowed you to level entire cities, which was just kind of fun to play around with. I don't know, I'm really glad that Microsoft decided to make this game backwards compatible with the Xbox One and Xbox Series X, because I remember having a lot of trouble trying to play this game on the Xbox 360 back in the day. So while the game might kind of show its age and its graphics and maybe gameplay to an extent, it's still a really fun open world sandbox to play around in, so I highly recommend it to anyone who likes these kinds of games. Pokemon Heart Gold and Soul Silver are the remakes to my favorite generation of Pokemon. I, like many other people, hold a special place in my heart with the original Red and Blue games. However, there's an element of discovery that came with the second generation. You had all new Pokemon to find, you had an entirely new region to explore, new gym leaders, 2 new types, a new Elite Four, all that stuff. But the thing that really brings it all together for me was after you finished the Elite Four, you went and explored the Kanto region again. You got to fight all the gym leaders that you fought at previous generations. You got to revisit the love that you had for this previous generation of Pokemon. And simply put, no generation of Pokemon has done this ever since. And so nothing has really recaptured that magic for me. I really enjoyed the Generation 1 remakes that came out on the Game Boy Advance, but when Heart Gold and Soul Silver were announced, I was ecstatic. I couldn't wait to go revisit these games that I loved so much. And they added so much more to the world. The Safari Zone was back, which is something that the original Gold and Silver games didn't have. They kept in the special storyline from Crystal. These games are really the perfect package of Pokemon. And while I think that the original Red and Blue had something special, Gold and Silver will forever remain in my heart as my favorite generation of Pokemon games. And Heart Gold and Soul Silver just take it up to the next level. Valve's Portal 2 is the next one on my list. I'm definitely a latecomer to Valve's games. I didn't play Half-Life until college. Portal was a great game, but I definitely rode the wave of it after it had come out. There are a couple reasons why I like Portal 2 more though. It introduced more mechanics that made the puzzles more interesting. I thought that the writing, which while a little on the nose, was hilarious between Wheatley and GLaDOS, and especially Cave Johnson. And the climax of the game, the final moment where you put everything you've learned from the rest of the game together and you realize what you have to do, there's nothing like it. And there's one more thing that really elevates Portal 2 above the first one for me. It is the co-op campaign. Being able to play Portal with another person and solve puzzles together is one of the most mind-blowing experiences that I've had as a video gamer. For those that don't know, first-person puzzlers are my favorite video game genre. I love that they use perspective to force you to visualize the entire puzzle room, and then you slowly put the pieces together what you need to do, and then when you execute on it, it's like the most palpable sense of satisfaction. And this is one of the only games that I got that by playing with someone else. And so while some people might say that the second game doesn't quite hold a torch to the first game, the second game for me wins it just because of the co-op missions.
I am not sure how I can make these tests any easier for you.
Next up is Return of the Obra Dinn. Remember when I was saying that first-person puzzlers are some of my favorite games? Well, Return of the Obra Dinn adds a unique twist on the genre. Using a mysterious pocket watch, you first hear the last few conversations that happen before someone is killed, and then you're shown the exact moment at which it happens. Your job is then to go around and find out who each of these people are, what their job was on the boat, and how they died. And while you do this, you're treated to a story that kind of takes place out of order. You're given all these different memories, and you have to piece together kind of what happened to the ship. Now, some of the people are very obvious, like the very first memory, it says, "Captain, Captain, let us in." But even in this first memory, you see people that you don't have names for. All you can see is some identifying characteristics about them. And it's not until later memories where you actually find out who they are by inspecting where they sleep or by piecing together kind of what happens around them. This is yet another example on my list of indie games doing something truly special, something truly unique. And between this and Papers, Please, the previous game by Lucas Pope, I have utmost faith that he will continue to impress us. Spec Ops: The Line is a unique take to the action shooter genre. In this game, you play as Captain Walker, who along with his Delta Force comrades are sent into Dubai after a sandstorm effectively wiped it off the map. You're tasked with going after the remnants of the 33rd, otherwise known as the Damned. And because this is a shooter, as soon as you enter the city, you are immediately met with resistance from both insurgents and natives, as well as members of the 33rd. This seems very confusing to someone who is used to playing shooter games where you don't kill any other Americans, or in Halo where you don't kill any other humans. So immediately this game, along with its menu music, is showing that war isn't always so black and white. Sometimes Americans aren't always the good guys. I love this game because in an era where Call of Duty was so super popular, everyone kind of just thought this was a Call of Duty clone and shrugged it off like nothing. But this actually is a pretty strong commentary on how video games play at war and how destructive war actually is, both to the citizens affected and the soldiers themselves. I really don't want to spoil this game to anyone that wants to play it, so I'm just going to stop right here and say if you came across this game and you just thought it was a normal Call of Duty clone, it really isn't. There's something deeper happening here, so I really recommend you give it a try. Next up is one of the most interesting choices on my list, Subnautica. The reason this is interesting is because I don't like survival games. I played a little bit of Minecraft and it just really wasn't my thing. I'm not creative enough to be able to build giant worlds like that, but Subnautica allowed me to kind of express that creativity in a different way. Earlier with Civ 3, I talked about that one more turn thing, and Subnautica definitely does a similar thing with its blueprints. At first, you're tasked with a very simple set of things to find. You want to be able to breathe underwater longer. You want to swim faster. And then eventually you unlock better tools and equipment that allow you to just do that, but faster. The loop here is incredibly addicting. Explore, gather, make, explore, gather, make, until eventually you're building a habitat for yourself and being able to upgrade your vehicles more, and etc, etc. The biomes in this game are absolutely beautiful and each have their own individual flair on what you would think we would be relatively samey environments since it all takes place underwater, but each biome actually ends up being really unique. So although I don't usually play survival games, this one makes a great exception to me. It's a fully handcrafted world for you to explore in. There's a story here, and I would say a pretty good one at that. Even when I was capturing this footage, I felt the lure of it trying to pull me back in and play more, so I think that should speak for itself for how good of a game this is. Alright, next up on my list is Super Mario Sunshine. Now this might be a controversial pick because this is my only Mario game that's on this list, but this really is my favorite Mario game. I think that this comes from an era of video games where Nintendo built their worlds to be a little more out of the box compared to the structure of other games in their series. The game starts out with Mario going on vacation, and although Princess Peach does actually end up getting kidnapped, all the worlds here have somewhat of a happy-go-lucky tone of someone who is on a tropical island. In fact, Delfino Plaza is so full of life in comparison to any of the other hub worlds in any of the other Mario games. Now, while most people criticize this game for its controls, I actually enjoyed controlling the Flood around, and using the hover nozzle as a way to kind of catch yourself when you accidentally mess up your platforming, actually I thought made the platforming easier, not harder. Now, the one exception to that is in the areas where they take off your Flood, and that can be incredibly annoying. However, I still think the controls are tight enough that if you practice and get good at the control scheme, then you can actually do those challenges fairly easily. While 64 might be the original 3D Mario game, and Galaxy, Galaxy 2, and now Odyssey kind of show what the next level of Mario can be, there's still a sense of focus that this game gives, and to me, that makes it my favorite of the 3D Mario games. The Witcher 3 is the next game up on my list. Normally when I play video games, I like to play the original before I play the sequel, or in this case, the third one in the trilogy. But I made a conscious decision to skip over The Witcher 1. I tried, I really did. I gave it about 4 hours before I decided it just was a little bit too old for what I wanted to play at the time. And then I didn't have time to really give The Witcher 2 a try. So instead, I dove right into The Witcher 3. After finishing the main story of this game, I kind of dove into the Witcher universe. I started reading the books. Eventually, when the show came out on Netflix, I started watching that. So I've kind of become somewhat of a Witcher fanboy. It's hard for me to explain how this game captures the whole monster hunting aspect of The Witcher. You have your potions, you have your signs, you have the ability to track monsters into the woods, but that's not all the Witcher series is about. It's not about just killing monsters, it's also about finding the humanity in some of these monsters that Geralt encounters. One of my favorite quest lines is in Skellige when you're confronted with monsters who don't believe that you want to save their lives, and you have to convince them that you do by listing all the other monsters that you've helped along your quest. And that's just one example of the fine side quests that are in this game. And the side quests are only the beginning. The main storyline of you seeking out Ciri after she's gone missing is the storyline of a father desperately seeking out his lost daughter. And while I didn't read the books before I played this game, reading the books after the fact really drove home the strength of the relationship between Ciri and Geralt. I've been letting Blood and Wine, the second expansion to this game, sit on the back burner for a while I finish reading the books, but once I do finish, I am really excited to get back into this game.
I'll take the trophy.
Alright, coming up next is another first-person puzzler. This one is The Witness. The Witness is a special game. It is a game with more than 500 line puzzles. And by line puzzles, I mean literally drawing your mouse from one part of a square to another part of a square. And while that may sound boring at first, it becomes more and more interesting as the game teaches you the various mechanics and patterns that you need in order to continue completing more of the puzzles. Most of these puzzles can actually be solved fairly quickly, and that's kind of the beauty of the game. It uses repeated, simple puzzles to teach you how the game is supposed to work. And then after you have mastered that mechanic, you move on to other puzzles which then combine different mechanics from different areas of the island all together into one. And then there's the great other part of this game. There's a whole other type of puzzle that is above the simple line puzzles. But I don't think I can describe it without spoiling it. And it's a very special moment of this game that I think everyone who plays this game should experience for themselves the first time. I played this game probably for about 30 to 40 hours the year that it came out. It is an incredibly tight, smart puzzler that really tries to teach you how to play the game. And while it doesn't hold your hand while you're playing it, it doesn't make you feel dumb either. It's incredible what this game is able to do with no narration and nothing but visual medium in order to communicate its rules to the player. You had to know that this was coming. If you know anything about me as a video gamer, you had to know that World of Warcraft was going to be on my greatest games of all time. Prior to this, I had mostly been playing RuneScape as a massively multiplayer online game. And so when I jumped into Azeroth, I was blown away by how beautiful this game was. Now, I will be the first to admit that I picked one of the most boring fantasy classes there is. I picked a human warrior. However, once I got up to max level, I quickly realized that the warrior was my favorite class for a reason. I loved to tank. I don't know whether it was the control freak in me or what, but being the person that was in charge of progressing the party through the dungeon, I don't know, it kind of gave me a sense of responsibility that I had never experienced before. I went through quite the journey while I played WoW. I played WoW for the greater part of 12 years. I made friends on WoW. I got my first taste of what it's like to lead a group of people on WoW. It was such a formative game for me over the years of my young adult life. I just don't think I would be the same person without it. While capturing footage for this, I rolled another human warrior, and I got to experience the awe that happens the first time you walk into Stormwind and the music swells. I got to experience walking into Goldshire for the first time, re-exploring Elwyn Forest again, and of course, killing Hogger. While I do miss my time playing World of Warcraft, I am sad to say that I don't think I'll ever be returning to the same type of WoW player that I was back in the olden days. Capturing this footage was a fun little reminder of what it was like back when I really loved this game. And while I'd love to play again, I don't think I can ever capture that magic again. I don't really know what the future is for WoW, but I will be keeping my eye on it. You never know what might bring me back. Alright, second to last on my list is Xenoblade Chronicles. This is a game that's infamous for the fans having to convince Nintendo to localize it in America. Once it finally came out, a really good friend of mine convinced me that I should try it. He said it was one of the greatest JRPG stories he's ever played. And trust me, that was saying a lot coming from this guy. And well, I went out, bought it, and was immediately enthralled by the story. You start off playing as Dunban, who is the only person that can wield the sacred artifact in a Monado. And then after the prologue, you start playing as Shulk, who also surprisingly can wield the Monado, and at an even greater efficiency than even Dunban can. The Monado has a special power. Unlike traditional weaponry, the Monado can actually harm the enemy Mechon, a race of machines that are from the other continent, Mechonis. But that's the thing, they're not really continents. They're two gigantic titans who killed each other in a battle for the world. The game and the world actually takes place on their corpses. You find out pretty early that the main colony, Colony 9, is on the Bionis' foot, and then you travel up his leg until eventually you reach his head. While I don't know if this is a concept that's ever been done before, it was new to me, and it blew my mind with just the scale at which this game was operating in. While I think a lot of people might criticize this game for the MMO combat or the kind of fetch quest stuff that happened on the side, the game's main story has so many twists and turns and surprises that it really is one of the greatest JRPG stories ever told. Now that it's been re-released for the Switch, there's no excuse for not trying it out. If you don't enjoy the combat, then maybe watch a video of the story or something like that. It is truly a masterpiece in storytelling. Alright, we're finally at my last one for my bottom 20 for my greatest games of all time. For this last one, I want to talk about Zero Escape: Virtue's Last Reward. Around the time this game came out, I was looking for other games to play on my Nintendo 3DS. By browsing around Reddit, I found that one of the most highly recommended games of the r/games subreddit was 999 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors. So I bought it, not knowing at all what to expect. When I first put it in, I didn't realize that it was a visual novel. I had never played a visual novel before. That being said, the mystery of the game immediately got to me. I enjoyed the kind of pseudoscience stuff that was being talked about, and the philosophical things, and then, a brutal murder happens. But that game was just the first one in a trilogy of visual novels in the same universe. Virtue's Last Reward is the second game of the series, and it opens very similarly. You have to escape a room, and once you get out, you realize you're caught in a very similar type of game that was played in the previous one. But this game had so many other twists and turns that by the time it was over, my mind was blown with what was happening. While I wouldn't recommend the visual novel genre to just about anyone, these games stand out in a sense. Because video games are an interactive medium, they can tell different kinds of stories than books or TV shows or movies can. And this is one of the few video games that really highlight that the most. And there it is. I hope you enjoyed the first 20 games in my top 30 games for my 30 years of life. Stay tuned to this channel for my top 10 games of all time.